The millionaire's twin daughters had mercilessly rejected 57 wealthy women who tried to take the place of the mother they had lost. But everything changes when a simple housekeeper enters the mansion and, with unexpected sensitivity, breaks through the wall of pain that no one had managed to cross. The instant bond between them creates an explosive tension that threatens to reveal dark secrets and hidden interests within the family itself. And it is this unlikely encounter that awakens a love capable of challenging prejudice, dismantling intrigues, and transforming everyone's lives forever. The crystal glass flew across the living room before any of the adults could react. It shattered against the Italian marble wall, just inches from the face of Victoria Davenport, heiress to one of the largest construction firms in the country. The 42-year-old woman, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than a standard car, stood paralyzed, her eyes wide with shock as glass fragments rained down on her designer shoes. Eleanor and Sophia Blackwood, 8-year-old identical twins, stood side by side in the middle of the room, their small fists clenched, their faces contorted in fury. They had the same long brown hair, the same penetrating green, eyes the same expression of pain transformed into rage. They were like two mirrors of each other, united by a trauma that no therapist had managed to undo in 4 years. Alexander Blackwood ran down the stairs upon hearing the crash. At 36, the businessman maintained his elegant posture even in moments of crisis, but there was a deep exhaustion in his dark eyes that no Italian suit could disguise. His perfectly combed black hair did not hide the grey strands that had appeared prematurely in recent years. He shot a look of desperate apology at Victoria before turning to his daughters. "She is not staying in our house," Eleanor shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at the visitor. Her voice was shrill, filled with a fierce conviction that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old child. "No one is going to replace our mother," Sophia added, and tears were beginning to form in the corners of her eyes, though her chin remained raised in defiance. No one. Ever. Alexander felt the familiar tightness in his chest, that mixture of unconditional love and absolute helplessness that consumed him every time he witnessed his daughter's suffering. Victoria was the 57th woman he had tried to introduce to the girls in the last 4 years. 57 attempts to rebuild something that resembled a family. 57 spectacular failures. "Victoria, please," he began, his voice low and tired. "Just give me a moment with them." The heiress took a step back, still clearly shaken. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the expensive handbag on her shoulder. "Alexander, this is unacceptable. These children need boundaries, discipline. They can't just attack people like this. I could have been seriously injured." The twins began to scream even louder, flailing their arms. Eleanor grabbed a cushion from the sofa and threw it in Victoria's direction, who narrowly dodged it. It was then that Sophia let her body drop to the marble floor, beginning to beat her feet and hands against the cold surface in a tantrum that Alexander knew all too well. The sound echoed through the immense mansion, a primal scream of pain that no amount of wealth could silence. From the side hallway, Audrey Blackwood appeared with hurried steps. Alexander's aunt, a 58-year-old woman who had managed the house since the tragedy, had a rehearsed expression of concern on her face. She wore discreet but expensive clothes, and her blonde hair was always impeccably styled. She approached the girls with calm gestures, though her eyes revealed a different glint, something calculated that Alexander was too tired to notice. "I'll take care of them, Alexander," Audrey said in a soft voice, placing her hands on Eleanor's shoulders. "Why don't you see Ms. Davenport to the door? The girls need to calm down." Alexander hesitated, torn between the desire to comfort his daughters and the social obligation to apologize properly to Victoria. The woman was already heading for the front door, her heels clicking with indignation against the floor. He followed her, each step feeling like lead. At the door, Victoria turned to him with an expression that mixed pity and censure. "Alexander, you are a good and successful man. Your companies are among the most prosperous in New York, but these girls will destroy any chance of happiness you might have. They need serious treatment, perhaps even placement in a specialized institution where they can learn to deal with their loss." Alexander felt anger rise like bile in his throat, but he forced himself to maintain his composure. "They are my daughters, Victoria. I won't send them anywhere. They've already lost too much. Then you'll spend the rest of your life alone, caring for two children who refuse to grow up." The woman adjusted her sunglasses on her face. "Good luck, Alexander. You're going to need it." She descended the marble steps of the entrance and got into her silver Mercedes convertible without looking back. Alexander stood at the door, watching the car disappear through the electronic gate that protected the 10,000-square-foot property on the Upper East Side, one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods. The three-story neoclassical mansion rose behind him like a monument to his loneliness, with its perfectly manicured gardens, its infinity pool, and its works of art that meant nothing without someone to share them with. When he returned inside, the twins were still on the living room floor, but now they were crying softly in Audrey's arms. His aunt stroked the girl's hair with mechanical movements, murmuring words of comfort that seemed empty. Alexander approached and knelt beside them. "Eleanor, Sophia, we need to talk about this," he said gently, trying to catch one of their gazes. "You can't keep reacting like this. Victoria was just a friend who came for tea." "You're lying," Eleanor accused, lifting her tear-stained face. "We saw how you looked at her, how you smiled, the same way you used to look at Mommy." Alexander felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. The mention of his wife, even after all these years, still had the power to paralyze him. Isabel had been everything to him, the woman who had transformed a workaholic businessman into someone who understood the meaning of home. Her departure had left a void he didn't know how to fill, especially since his daughters seemed determined to keep that void intact, like a shrine to the mother who would never return. "I loved your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always will. But that doesn't mean I have to be alone forever. Don't you want Daddy to be happy?" "You can't be happy with someone else," Sophia replied, her voice small but firm. "If you love another woman, you'll forget Mommy. And if you forget, we can't let that happen. We're the only ones who still remember everything." Audrey sighed dramatically. "I'll take them to their room. They need to rest. I've already scheduled an extra session with Dr. Harrison for tomorrow. These episodes are becoming more frequent." Alexander nodded, defeated. He felt drained, as if he had run an emotional marathon that never ended. He watched his aunt guide the girls up the stairs, their small hands clutching the mahogany banister as they slowly ascended. When they disappeared into the second-floor hallway, he let himself fall onto the grey velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. The living room was a vast, luxurious space with a double-height ceiling, check crystal chandeliers, and French windows overlooking the garden. There was a marble fireplace, now unlit in the warmth of March, and paintings by renowned artists on the walls. But it all seemed dead, devoid of the life that Isabel had brought with her laughter, her spontaneous joy, her ability to turn that enormous house into a welcoming home. 4 years. 4 years since that terrible night. Alexander could still see with painful clarity the headlights of the other car coming the wrong way down the expressway, the way Isabel had tried to swerve but couldn't. The sound of the impact that seemed to echo eternally in his memory. The twins were in the back seat. They saw everything. The trauma of that moment had taken root so deeply in them that no therapist, no treatment, no amount of love had been able to uproot it. And then there were the suitors. Alexander wasn't looking to replace Isabel. That would be impossible. But the loneliness weighed on him like a stone, especially on long nights when the girls were finally asleep and he was left alone with his thoughts. He had tried to connect with women who made sense, women from his social circle, successful executives, educated heiresses, elegant socialites, 57 of them. Each had been met with increasing hostility by the twins. Audrey came down the stairs half an hour later, carrying a cup of coffee that Alexander hadn't asked for. She sat beside him, her maternal presence filling the silence. "You need to accept that maybe it's not the right time, Alexander. The girls are still processing everything. Dr. Harrison always says that childhood trauma is complex, that it takes time. It's been 4 years, Audrey. How much more time?" His aunt shrugged, sipping her own coffee. As long as it takes, you can't force healing. By the way, speaking of which, I need to transfer more funds to the girl's treatment account. Dr. Harrison wants to introduce a new therapy that might help, but it's a bit more expensive. They're specialized, much more intensive sessions. Alexander nodded, without really processing. Audrey handled the household finances, including all expenses related to the twins' psychological treatment. It was one of the few burdens he had managed to delegate, especially since his older sister seemed genuinely concerned about her niece's well-being. Do whatever is necessary. Money is not an issue. I know, dear. I know. Audrey touched his arm affectionately. You only want what's best for them. But maybe for now what's best is just you and them. A family of 3, at least until they're ready. Alexander looked out the window at the garden where the girls used to play with Isabel, running among the rose bushes and laughing as their mother chased them. Now that space remained empty most of the time, the twins preferring to stay locked in their rooms, surrounded by photos and memories of a woman who would never grow old, who would remain eternally frozen in her beauty and kindness. Maybe Audrey was right. Maybe he really should accept that his destiny was to raise his daughters alone, to sacrifice any hope of adult companionship for the sake of their stability. But a part of him, a part that grew weaker each day, still clung to the hope that one day the girls might let someone new in, someone who wouldn't threaten their mother's memory, but who could bring a little light back into that gloomy house. He had no way of knowing that this person would arrive in a completely unexpected way, coming from a world entirely different from his, and that her arrival would trigger a sequence of events that would test everything he believed about love, trust, and redemption. 3 days later, the Blackwood mansion was in chaos. The head housekeeper had resigned after another of the twins' tantrums, and 2 of the remaining maids had called in sick. Audrey circulated through the house with a tense expression, phone glued to her ear as she tried to hire an emergency cleaning crew. The charity gala that Alexander hosted annually in Isabel's memory was a week away, and the house needed to be impeccable. That's how Grace Miller arrived at the mansion that March morning. At 24, she had spent the last 6 years working as a domestic helper in the homes of New York's elite. She was a simple girl from Queens, with long black hair always tied in a practical bun, expressive brown eyes, and hands calloused from hard work. She wore the standard navy blue uniform that all cleaning companies provided, and carried her worn-out backpack with her personal belongings. The agency had called at the last minute, offering double the usual pay for an emergency cleaning at a mansion on the Upper East Side. Grace had accepted without hesitation. She needed the money. Her mother, Sarah, was ill, and the medications consumed almost everything she earned. A few more cleanings like this, and she could pay the month's bills with ease. Audrey received her at the back entrance with a quick, appraising glance. "You must be Grace. The agency said you are efficient and discreet." "Yes, ma'am, I do my work without being a bother." "Excellent. The house has 23 rooms, but today I want you to focus on the guest bedrooms, the main dining room, and the library. We have an event in a week and everything needs to be perfect." Audrey handed her a detailed list. "You have access to the cleaning supplies in the basement closet. If you have any questions, find me." Grace nodded and began her work. The mansion was stunning, larger than any place she had ever worked. The high ceilings, the expensive chandeliers, the imported furniture. Everything screamed a level of wealth she could barely comprehend. As she cleaned, she couldn't help but wonder how a single family needed so much space. She was finishing cleaning the second-floor library when she heard a crash from the hallway. It was the sound of something breaking, followed by high-pitched screams. Grace dropped her cleaning cloth and walked cautiously toward the noise. The screams grew louder, more desperate. The door to one of the bedrooms was ajar. Through the crack, Grace saw 2 identical girls in the midst of what appeared to be a methodical destruction. They were pulling books from shelves, throwing toys against the walls, tearing up drawings. Tears streamed down their faces as they shouted words Grace couldn't quite make out. Audrey appeared running down the hall, breathless. "Girls, stop this right now. You're going to hurt yourselves." The twins gave no sign of having heard her. One of them, Eleanor, picked up a picture frame from the desk and raised it as if to throw it. The photo inside showed a beautiful woman embracing the two girls, all of them smiling. Grace immediately recognized the look in that image, that genuine happiness that seemed to belong to another time. "Don't get any closer," Audrey warned Grace in a sharp voice. "They're having an episode. I'm going to call the doctor. You can go back to your work." But Grace couldn't walk away. There was something about those girls, that raw desperation that touched a deep part of herself. She knew that pain. She recognized that fury born of grief, of the injustice of having something precious torn away without warning. Before Audrey could stop her, Grace pushed the door open and entered the room. The twins froze for an instant, surprised by the presence of a stranger. Sophia still clutched a teddy bear by its paws, ready to throw it. "You have every right to be angry," Grace said, her voice firm but gentle. It wasn't loud or authoritarian, just sincere. When something bad happens, when we lose someone we love, anger is the only thing that makes sense, because pure pain is too heavy to carry alone. The girls stared at her, confused. Their small chests rose and fell rapidly, the adrenaline of destruction still coursing through their veins. Eleanor slowly lowered the picture frame, but she didn't let it go. "You don't know anything about us," Eleanor said, defiant though her voice trembled. "You're right, I don't." Grace took a step into the room, ignoring the broken toys under her feet. "But I know what it's like to lose someone suddenly. My father disappeared when I was 9. He left for work one morning and never came back. They found his car abandoned on a highway. We never found out what happened." Sophia let the teddy bear fall. Both girls were now looking at Grace with full attention, as if seeing for the first time not just an adult, but another person who understood. "I was so angry," Grace continued, her voice lowering. "I broke things too. I screamed at my mum. I wouldn't let anyone talk about him because it hurt too much. And you know what I discovered? That anger doesn't bring anyone back. It just makes you feel more alone. Our mom isn't coming back." "Either," Eleanor said, and for the first time her voice held no anger, only a sadness so profound it seemed impossible in someone so young. "She's gone and nobody understands. They all want us to forget, to be normal. But how can we forget?" Grace knelt on the floor, getting down to the girl's level. "You don't have to forget, ever. The memory of someone we love is sacred. But carrying this pain alone, without letting anyone help, will keep you trapped on that terrible day forever. Would your mother have wanted that for you?" The question hung in the air like a revelation. No one in 4 years had asked that specific question in that specific way. Everyone talked about what the girls needed to do, about how they should behave, about therapies and treatments. No one had asked what Isabel herself would have wanted for her daughters. Sophia was the first to break. Her face contorted and she began to sob, not the angry screams from before, but a deep, genuine cry that seemed to come from a place that had been locked away for years. She ran to Grace and threw herself into her arms, burying her face in the navy blue uniform. Eleanor stood still for another moment, fighting against her vulnerability, but then she too gave in. She ran to Grace and hugged her from the other side, and the three of them remained there on the floor of the destroyed room, the twins crying as they hadn't cried since the accident, releasing years of accumulated pain. Audrey stood at the door, her mouth open in shock. In 4 years, dozens of therapists, doctors, and specialists had failed to get the girls to open up like this, and this housekeeper, in less than 5 minutes, had achieved what all the others had failed to do. Grace stroked the girls' hair, murmuring soft words as they cried. "It's okay. You can cry as much as you need to. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." It took almost 20 minutes for the tears to finally cease. The twins pulled away from Grace with swollen red faces, but there was something different about them now. A subtle lightness, as if an immense weight had been partially lifted. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Grace. Grace Miller." "Are you going to work here every day?" The hope in Sophia's voice was almost palpable. "Today is just a special cleaning, but who knows?" Alexander appeared in the hallway at that moment, his suit wrinkled and his tie loosened. He had left an important meeting early after Audrey called saying the girls were having another crisis. He had mentally prepared for the usual chaos, but what he found was something completely different. His daughters were sitting on the floor with a stranger in a housekeeper's uniform, the three of them talking quietly. The room was a mess, but the girls weren't screaming or breaking things. They were calm. More than that, they were smiling slightly as Grace showed them something on her phone. "What happened here?" he asked, confused. Grace stood up quickly, smoothing her uniform. "I'm so sorry, sir. I heard the girls and came in without permission. It wasn't my intention to overstep." Alexander looked at his daughters, then at the stranger, then at Audrey, who still seemed to be in shock. "Audrey, can you give me a minute?" His aunt hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and monitor the situation, but she nodded and left. Alexander closed the door and approached. "You're from the cleaning company?" "Yes, sir, Grace Miller. I came for the emergency cleaning." "And what exactly did you say to my daughters?" Grace chose her words carefully. "I heard them crying and I realized they were in pain. I just tried to show them that someone understood. I shared my own experience with loss. It was instinctive." Alexander studied her for a long moment. There was something genuine about this woman, an authenticity that all the expensive therapists and educated socialites had failed to convey. 57 women had tried to connect with his daughters, and all had failed. And now this housekeeper, in a matter of minutes, had achieved the impossible. "Daddy," Eleanor called, her voice small. "Grace lost someone too. She understands." "She didn't lie to us," Sophia added. "She didn't say it would all be okay soon. She told the truth." Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. "Grace, can you stay for a few more minutes? I'd like to talk to you. Girls, please go wash your faces and change your clothes. We can order pizza for lunch." The twins obeyed without complaint, which in itself was a miracle. When they left, Alexander turned fully to Grace. "Do you have experience with children?" "I helped raise my 3 younger siblings after my father disappeared. My mother worked 2 jobs, so I was responsible for them." She paused. "Look, I know I'm just the cleaning lady. I'm not trying to interfere with your family. I just couldn't stand by and watch those girls suffer. How old are you?" 24. "Are you married? Do you have children?" "No, sir. Single. No children." Alexander made a decision that would change everything. "I want to offer you a job, not as a housekeeper but as a caregiver for my daughters, exclusively. You would have your own room here, regular days off, and I would pay you 3 times what you currently make. It would be a formal contract with full benefits." Grace was stunned. It was an absurd offer, too generous, too suspicious. "I don't understand why." "Because in 4 years, 57 women have tried to get close to my daughters, and they all failed. You succeeded in 5 minutes. Whatever you did, it worked. My daughters need someone like you." "But I have no training in psychology. I'm not a therapist. I don't have any special degree." "You have genuine empathy. You have real experience with loss, and most importantly, my daughters trusted you. That's worth more than any degree." He extended his hand. "So do you accept?" Grace looked at his outstretched hand, then at the destroyed room, then at the door through which the twins had left. She thought of her sick mother, the piling bills, the hard labor that was destroying her back day after day. But more than that, she thought of those 2 girls with green eyes full of pain, and how for the first time in a long time she had felt she could make a difference in someone's life. She shook his hand. "I accept." Grace's first week at the Blackwood mansion was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. The changes were subtle at first, small miracles that Alexander hardly dared to believe. The twins came down for breakfast without needing to be called 3 times. They ate without complaining about the food. They talked about their days at school without turning every question into a battle. The room Alexander offered Grace was on the 3rd floor, originally designed to be a governess's room. It was simple but comfortable, with a double bed, a built-in closet, a small desk and a window overlooking the gardens. For Grace, who had spent the last few years sharing a tiny 2-room apartment with her mother and siblings in Queens, the space felt like an unimaginable luxury. She brought few things with her: a suitcase with clothes, a few family photos, a rosary that had belonged to her grandmother. She had no pretensions of belonging to this world of marble and crystal. She was there to do a job, to help two girls who desperately needed someone to understand them. The mornings started early. Grace would wake at 6, shower and go down to help with the girls' breakfast. She didn't cook, there was a cook for that, but her presence at the table made all the difference. Eleanor and Sophia talked to her about dreams they'd had, about classes at school, about small worries they had never shared with the adults around them. On the third day, Sophia shyly asked if Grace could braid her hair. It was a task Audrey had taken over in recent years with mechanical efficiency, always hurried, always with other responsibilities calling for her attention. Grace sat on the floor of the girls' room and spent 40 minutes creating elaborate braids, listening to Sophia chatter about her friend from school and a cartoon she liked to watch. Eleanor watched from her corner, pretending to read a book, but her eyes didn't move across the pages. Grace noticed. When she finished Sophia's braids, she turned to Eleanor with a smile. "Your turn. I want to do something special on you, too." The girl tried to maintain her facade of indifference for a few more seconds, but then she dropped the book and joined her sister. As Grace worked on her hair, Eleanor started asking questions. "Did you really never find out what happened to your dad?" "Never. It's like he just vanished from the world." "Do you get angry about that?" Grace stopped braiding for a moment, considering the question. "I used to. For years I was furious. At him for leaving, at the world for not having answers, at myself for not being able to do anything. But the anger only hurt me. Eventually I had to choose between being stuck on that day or keep on living." "But you didn't forget him," Eleanor said. "It wasn't a question, but a need for confirmation." "Never. I think about him every day, but now when I think of him I can also remember the good things, the stories he told, the way he laughed, how he taught me to ride a bike. The pain is always there, but it's not the only thing left of him." The twins fell silent, processing. It was a truth no one had presented to them in that way before, the possibility of keeping their mother's memory alive without being imprisoned by the tragedy. Alexander observed everything from a distance, still cautious but hopeful. He would come home from the office and find his daughters in the living room with Grace, the three of them laughing about something that had happened during the day. They ate dinner together now, genuine conversations replacing the tense silences. At night, Grace read stories to the girls, something they hadn't allowed since Isabel was gone. Audrey observed everything too, but with very different feelings. The aunt circulated through the mansion like a restless ghost, finding excuses to appear wherever Grace and the girls were. She always had something to criticize, always in a tone that mixed false concern with poorly disguised disapproval. "Grace, you shouldn't let the girls eat so many sweets after dinner. The sugar isn't good for them." "Grace, the girls need to maintain a structured routine. You can't let them watch television for so long." "Grace, are you sure you're qualified to help them with their homework? It's advanced material for their age." Grace absorbed the criticism with patience, always responding politely, but sticking to her methods. She had learned early in life to recognize when someone felt threatened, and Audrey definitely felt threatened. The question was understanding why. On Friday of the first week, something extraordinary happened. The twins asked to go to the park. It was a simple activity, commonplace for most children, but Eleanor and Sophia hadn't been to a park since the accident. Public places, crowds, the normality of everyday life. It had all become a source of anxiety for them. Alexander nearly fell out of his chair when he heard the request. "Are you sure? We can take it slow, start with something smaller." "We want to go," Eleanor insisted, holding Grace's hand, "but only if Grace comes with us." They went to Central Park that sunny afternoon. Alexander drove the Mercedes SUV with Grace in the passenger seat and the twins chattering in the back. It was surreal. Months ago, a simple trip to the supermarket resulted in panic attacks. Now they were excited, pointing out the window, making plans about which playground equipment they wanted to use. At the park, Grace ran with them, pushed them on the swings, pretended to be a monster in a game of tag. She scraped her knee when she fell trying to keep up with the girls' speed. She laughed out loud, genuinely, without the polished restraint that all the other women maintained. Alexander sat on a bench and just watched. There was something hypnotic about seeing his daughters being children again, Eleanor sliding down the slide with her arms raised, Sophia building sandcastles in the sandbox. Grace in the middle of it all, her presence not intrusive but essential, as if she had always been part of the picture. "She's different, isn't she?" a voice said beside him. Alexander turned to find an older man sitting on the bench, watching his own grandchildren playing nearby. "Excuse me?" Alexander asked. "The young woman there, your wife, I presume. She has that natural gift with children. My late wife was like that. Some people just know how to reach a little one's heart." Alexander didn't correct the mistake. There was something comfortable in letting the stranger believe this was his family, complete and functional. Yes, she's special. When they returned home at dusk, the twins were exhausted but happy. They fell asleep without resistance, without the usual nightmares that plagued them. Alexander found Grace in the kitchen, making tea. "You did something amazing today," he said, leaning against the counter. "I can't even remember the last time I saw my daughters so happy." Grace smiled, but there was caution in her eyes. "They just needed permission to be children again. Sometimes when we go through something traumatic, we forget that we can still have moments of joy. It doesn't mean we forget the person we lost." "How did you get so wise at only 24? Necessity. When you have to grow up fast, you learn things that other people take a lifetime to understand." She took a sip of her tea. "Mr. Blackwood, I wanted to thank you for this opportunity. This job means more to me than you can imagine. Please call me Alexander, and I'm the one who should be thanking you. You brought my daughters back to me." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, just the sound of the kettle cooling and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Alexander realized he was looking at Grace differently, noticing things he hadn't noticed before. The way her eyes lit up when she smiled, the strength in her hands, calloused from work, the authenticity that emanated from her like a natural perfume. He pushed those thoughts away quickly. Grace was his daughter's caregiver, someone who was doing a job. Involving romantic feelings would be inappropriate. It would destroy the very thing that was working so well. Audrey entered the kitchen at that moment, interrupting the moment. "Oh, you're here, Alexander. We need to talk about the household finances. And Grace, shouldn't you be resting? It's been a long day." It was a clear dismissal. Grace took the hint and nodded, wishing them good night and heading up to her room. When she left, Audrey turned to Alexander with a serious expression. "Are you comfortable with how quickly things are changing?" Alexander frowned. "What do you mean?" "The girls are getting very attached to Grace, very quickly. What if she decides to leave? What if she's not who she seems to be? You barely know this young woman, Alexander. You didn't check her references properly. You didn't investigate her past." "I trust my instincts, and more importantly, the girls trust her." Audrey sighed, a perfect performance of sisterly concern. "I just worry about you all. After everything you've been through, I don't want to see the girls get hurt again. This girl might seem perfect now, but we all know how people from certain social classes can be opportunistic." Alexander felt irritation growing. "Grace isn't like that. She's genuine. I hope you're right. By the way, Dr. Harrison called. He's concerned he hasn't seen the girls for their last few sessions. He thinks they need to maintain consistency in their treatment. They're getting better, Audrey. For the first time in 4 years, they're actually getting better. Maybe they don't need so many sessions." His aunt tensed, though she tried to hide it. "Well, you're the father. You decide. But I still think we should maintain the psychological follow-up, just as a precaution." Alexander agreed distractedly, his mind still at the park, on his daughter's laughter, on the way Grace had brought them back to life. Audrey left the kitchen with stiff steps, heading up to her own room on the second floor. Locked in her room, Audrey turned on her computer and opened the hidden spreadsheet. 4 years of carefully documented embezzlements, each transfer disguised as a payment for the girl's psychological treatment. Dr. Harrison was real, but the extra sessions, the specialized treatments, the experimental therapies, that was all fiction. The money went straight into offshore accounts she had created. $347,000. That's how much she had accumulated. The plan had always been to continue for a few more years, amass $500,000, and then retire comfortably somewhere quiet. But now, with that housekeeper changing everything, The plan was at risk. If Alexander married again, any remotely intelligent wife would want to understand the household finances. An audit would reveal everything: prison, scandal, the loss of everything she had built. Audrey couldn't allow that. Grace had to leave that house, and fast. But it had to be done subtly. It couldn't look like she was sabotaging something that was clearly helping the girls. She needed to make Grace look like the villain. She picked up the phone and started making calls. She knew people, had contacts in various elite households. Someone must know some scandal about Grace Miller, something she could use. Everyone had skeletons in their closet, especially people desperate for money. On Monday, Audrey began to spread subtle doubts among the other household staff. "Did you hear that Grace was fired from her last job? Something about items going missing from the house. She seems trustworthy, but some people are very good at faking it, aren't they?" The seeds of mistrust were planted. Audrey smiled to herself as she prepared the next phase. Grace Miller didn't know it, but she had just made a powerful enemy. And Audrey Blackwood always won her battles, no matter the cost. 3 weeks had passed since Grace entered the lives of the Blackwood twins. The transformation was now undeniable, impossible to ignore. Eleanor and Sophia weren't just surviving, they were flourishing. They came home from school chattering about teachers and classmates. They did their homework without drama. They smiled frequently, genuine laughter that filled the mansion with a life that had been absent for so long. Alexander arrived home one Thursday to find the three of them in the garden. Grace had spread a large blanket on the grass and organized an impromptu picnic with sandwiches, fruit, and juice. The girls were lying on their backs looking at the clouds, pointing out imaginary shapes, while Grace invented stories for each one. "That one looks like a dragon," Eleanor declared, pointing to an elongated cloud. "That's Bartholomew the dragon," Grace said in a dramatic voice. "He was the kindest dragon in the whole kingdom, but no one believed him because dragons have a reputation for being scary. Until one day, a brave princess decided to get to know him for real." "And what happened?" Sophia asked, completely absorbed. "They became best friends, and the dragon helped the princess save the kingdom by using his fire to light fireplaces during harsh winters, and by flying to deliver important messages to distant villages. Everyone learned that sometimes people, or dragons, are very different from what they seem on the outside." Alexander watched the scene from the terrace, unable to approach and break the perfect moment. There was something deeply comforting in seeing his daughters so relaxed, so happy. And Grace, with her authentic simplicity, was the center of that happiness. He realized he was thinking about her with increasing frequency, not just as the girl's caregiver, but as a fascinating person in her own right. The way she laughed, throwing her head back without inhibition. The natural empathy she showed not only to the twins, but to everyone in the house. Even the cook, Mrs. Gable, who was notoriously hard to please, had grown fond of Grace. He had been a widower for 4 years, and during that time, 57 women had passed through his life. Beautiful, intelligent, successful women, but none had awakened. In him what Grace did. Perhaps it was precisely her lack of pretense, her genuineness in a world of carefully constructed appearances. Alexander pushed the thoughts away. Grace worked for him. There was an enormous power imbalance. She depended on his salary to support her family. Any advance on his part would be inappropriate, potentially predatory. He wasn't that kind of man. "Daddy?" Eleanor spotted him on the terrace and waved excitedly. "Come have a picnic with us." He came down and joined the group on the grass. Grace smiled at him, a genuine and welcoming smile that made his heart race inconveniently. "Mr. Blackwood, have a sandwich. Mrs. Gable made them with that special bread you like." "Alexander," he corrected gently. "I've asked you to call me Alexander." "Sorry, Habit." She offered him the plate, and their fingers brushed briefly as he took a sandwich. They both pulled away quickly, but there was a moment of mutual recognition, a spark that neither was ready to name. "Grace is telling us stories about the clouds," Sophia explained. "It's much more fun than studying grammar." "Grammar is important too," Grace reminded her gently. "But sometimes we need creative breaks for our brains to process everything." "You're very good with them," Alexander said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. You have a natural gift." Grace blushed slightly. "I just do what feels right. The girls make it easy. They're special." Their eyes met again, holding for a second longer than necessary. Eleanor and Sophia watched with growing interest, their young minds already plotting possibilities. The afternoon continued peacefully, but from the second floor, Audrey watched through her bedroom window with a grim expression. She had spent the last few weeks discreetly investigating Grace, calling former employers, talking to people from the neighborhood in Queens where the girl lived. To her frustration, she found nothing substantial. Everyone spoke well of her, hard-working, honest, responsible, but Audrey wouldn't give up so easily. She had started a more subtle campaign, comments left casually for Alexander about how strange it was for someone to be so dedicated to a job without ulterior motives. Suggestions that perhaps Grace was getting too attached to the girls, creating an unhealthy dependency. The other household staff had already been influenced. Mrs. Gable had resisted at first, but even she began to question when Audrey mentioned it was dangerous to trust strangers so quickly, especially when vulnerable children were involved. That evening, during dinner, Audrey brought the subject up again. "Alexander, I've been thinking a lot about the situation with Grace." Alexander looked at her over his wine glass. "What situation?" "Well, she's been here for almost a month and the girls are extremely attached. It worries me. If for some reason she decides to leave, the emotional impact will be devastating for them. Maybe we should hire another person, create a broader support network so they don't depend on just one person. Audrey, the girls are happy for the first time in years. Why do you want to change that?" "I don't want to change it, I just want to protect them." His aunt leaned forward, her voice laden with rehearsed concern. "Have you done a full background check? Checked all her references? Do you know where she was before she came to work here?" "Are you implying something?" "I'm just being cautious. There are many stories of people who deceive wealthy families, gain their trust, and then take advantage of the situation. I'm not saying Grace is like that, but you can never be too careful." Alexander felt irritation growing. "Grace is not like that. I trust her." "Isabel trusted people easily too," Audrey said, deliberately using his late wife's name as a weapon. And look what happened. The silence that followed was icy. Alexander placed his fork on the table with more force than he intended. "That was unnecessary and cruel." Audrey backed down, feigning remorse. "I'm sorry. That was insensitive of me. I just worry about you all. It's my duty as family." Alexander finished dinner in silence and went up to his office, but Audrey's words had planted a tiny seed of doubt. Not about Grace's character, he truly believed in her, but about the dependency that was being created. What if something happened? What if Grace decided this life wasn't for her? Later that night, he went to the twins' room to say goodnight. He found them already in their pajamas, sitting in bed while Grace read a book about adventures at sea. And then the pirate looked at the horizon and realized that the greatest treasure wasn't gold, but the friendships he had made along the journey, Grace read, using different voices for each character. "That story is about us," Eleanor declared. "The treasure is the people we love." "Exactly." Grace closed the book. "People are always more valuable than things." Alexander leaned against the door, watching. There was something comforting about the domestic scene. After saying goodnight to the girls, he walked Grace to the hallway. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. "Of course." They went to the library, a private space away from prying ears. Alexander closed the door and turned to her, choosing his words carefully. "Grace, I want you to know how grateful I am for what you've done for my daughters. The change in them is extraordinary. Thank you, they're wonderful children. It was easy to connect with them. But I also want to make sure you're happy here, that this isn't too overwhelming. You've practically given up your personal life to care for them." Grace thought for a moment. "To be honest, my life before wasn't very exciting. I worked from house to house, came back to a cramped apartment, took care of my mother. Here, I feel like I'm making a real difference. The girls have reminded me why I enjoy helping people. Do you have a boyfriend, friends you miss?" She laughed softly. "I haven't had a boyfriend in years." And my friends understand. They know this opportunity is important to me. She looked at him directly. Why are you asking me this? Did someone say something? Alexander hesitated. Audrey has expressed some concerns about how much the girls depend on you, about what would happen if you decided to leave. Ah, Grace nodded, understanding. Your aunt doesn't like me very much, does she? It's not personal. She's overprotective of the girls. It feels very personal. Grace crossed her arms. She's been making comments, spreading little doubts about me among the other staff. I'm not stupid. I can tell when someone is trying to sabotage me. Alexander was surprised by her frankness. I didn't know that. You should have told me. And say what? That your aunt doesn't trust me? Would you have believed me or thought I was being paranoid? Grace sighed. Look, I understand her position. I'm a stranger who came in and changed the dynamic of the house. It's natural for her to feel threatened. But you don't have ulterior motives. You genuinely care about the girls. Yes, I do, more than I probably should. She looked down at her own hands. They remind me of myself at that age, trying to process a loss that was too big to understand. I want to help them not get stuck in that pain like I did. You were stuck? For years. Until I realized that living wasn't betraying my father, that I could move on and still love him. The silence between them was now charged with something deeper. Alexander took a step closer without thinking. Grace, I need to admit something. I don't just think of you as the girl's caregiver. She looked at him, alert. Mr. Blackwood. Alexander. He took another step. And I know I shouldn't say this. I know there's an imbalance here, that you work for me and that complicates everything, but I can't stop thinking about you, about who you are, about how you've transformed not just the girls' lives but mine too. Grace stepped back, though her eyes showed conflict. We can't. This would be completely inappropriate. I know, but I needed you to know. And now that I know, what's changed? She shook her head. You're my employer. I depend on this job. My family depends on the salary you pay. Anything between us would be compromised by that imbalance. You're right. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I need to go. Grace walked quickly to the door, but stopped with her hand on the knob. For what it's worth, it's not one-sided, but we can't, for the same reasons you just said. She left, leaving Alexander alone in the library. He had complicated everything. He should have kept his feelings to himself, preserved the professional relationship that was working so well, but the heart didn't understand should. The following days were marked by a subtle tension that hung between Alexander and Grace. They strived to maintain an appropriate distance, conversations strictly professional, avoiding prolonged glances. But the twins, with the keen perception children have for emotional dynamics, noticed everything. Eleanor and Sophia began to observe the two adults with renewed interest. They noticed how their father smiled differently when Grace entered the room, how she blushed slightly when he thanked her for something. The small gestures that betrayed feelings larger than unspoken words. One Saturday afternoon, the twins locked themselves in their room for a secret meeting. They sat on the floor surrounded by dolls and books, but focused on a much more important matter. Have you noticed how Daddy gets when Grace is around? Eleanor whispered, though they were alone. I notice. And Grace gets different too. Sophia hugged her teddy bear. Do you think they like each other? I'm sure of it. It's like in those movies we watch, when two people keep looking at each other and get all awkward. Sophia was silent for a moment, processing. Do you think it would be bad if Daddy liked Grace? Eleanor considered carefully. She was afraid of betraying their mother's memory, but there was also something about Grace that felt different from all the other women. Grace isn't trying to replace Mommy. She always talks about Mommy when we ask. She understands. I like her, Sophia admitted quietly. A lot. She reminds me of how it was before the accident, when we were happy. I like her too. Eleanor took her sister's hand. Do you think Mommy would be mad if we wanted Grace to stay forever? Not as an employee, but as a real part of the family. The two sat in silence, thinking of the mother they had lost, They remembered her smile, the way she hugged them, her bedtime stories. Isabel had been everything to them, but she was no longer there, and as painful as it was to admit, they needed someone. Grace filled a void that had been open for a long time. "I think Mommy would want us to be happy," Sophia said finally. "She always said that love doesn't end, that it continues even when the person is no longer here. Maybe love is big enough to include more people. Then it's decided." Eleanor slapped her hand against Sophia's as if sealing a pact. "We're going to get Daddy and Grace together. They just need a little push." The girls began their plan subtly. They insisted that their father have dinner with them and Grace every night. They invented excuses for the two to be alone, like asking them to go buy something they needed together. They constantly praised Grace in their father's presence, mentioning how nice, pretty and smart she was. One night, as Grace was tucking them in, Eleanor asked a seemingly innocent question. "Grace, would you like to have children one day?" Grace was caught off guard. "I think so. I've always liked children." "And would you want to get married?" Sophia joined the interrogation. "Well, maybe, if I found the right person." "How would you know it's the right person?" Grace smiled, thinking. "I think it would be someone who makes me want to be better, someone who understands my flaws but chooses to stay anyway, someone who makes me laugh and feel safe to be myself. Like Daddy," Eleanor said with all the naturalness in the world. Grace froze. "What do you mean?" "You and Daddy would be a good couple. He's nice, you're nice, and we already like you. It would be perfect." "Girls, that's not how it works." Grace tried to keep her voice neutral. "Your father is my employer. Besides, he loved your mother very much." "But Mommy's not coming back," Sophia said with a frankness that broke Grace's heart. "And Daddy is so lonely. We see him sometimes at night, sitting in his room looking at old photos. He needs someone too." "You know I care about you both very much," Grace began carefully. "But some things are complicated in the adult world. What you're suggesting can't happen." "Why not?" Eleanor challenged. "Because people would talk? Because you're not rich like those other boring women who came here?" Grace sighed. "Partly because of that, yes. The world can be cruel to relationships that seem unequal, and I don't want your father to be judged or for you to be hurt because of it." "We don't care what people think," Sophia declared, with the absolute conviction of a child. "We just want a real family again." Grace hugged them both, feeling tears burn her eyes. "You already have a family. You have your father who loves you more than anything, and you have a mother who, even though she's not here, is still taking care of you somehow. She will always be a part of your family." "But you could be too," Eleanor insisted. "Please, just think about it. Just consider it." Grace promised she would think about it, just to end the painful conversation. After the girls fell asleep, she went downstairs and found Alexander in his office, working on papers that seemed endless. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" He looked up, and even in the soft light of the desk lamp, she could see the weariness on his face. "Of course, come in." Grace told him about the conversation with the twins, keeping the details but conveying the essence. Alexander was silent for a long moment after she finished. "They said all that?" "They did, and with quite a bit of conviction." She sat in the chair opposite his desk. "Alexander, I think we need to be careful. The girls are creating expectations we can't fulfill." "You're right." He leaned back in his chair, running his hands over his face. "But they're not entirely wrong about how I feel, and they've clearly noticed something in you too. That doesn't matter." Grace tried to keep her voice firm. "What matters is their well-being, and complicating our professional relationship wouldn't be good for anyone." "You're being practical. I admire that." "Someone has to be." She stood up. "I will continue to maintain an appropriate distance. I suggest you do the same." Alexander watched her walk to the door, but then he spoke. "Grace, just one thing. If circumstances were different, if there wasn't all this complexity, would you consider it?" She stopped but didn't turn around. "Consider what?" "Us. A possibility of us." The silence stretched on. Finally, Grace answered quietly. The circumstances are what they are. There's no point in thinking about hypotheticals. She left, leaving Alexander with his turbulent thoughts and forgotten paperwork. From the second floor, Audrey had overheard part of the conversation through the intercom system she had discreetly activated. She knew it was an invasion of privacy, but she needed to know what was happening in her own house. And what she heard confirmed her worst fears. Alexander was falling for the housekeeper. The girls adored her. It was only a matter of time before he did something stupid like propose marriage. And then everything Audrey had built over the last 4 years would crumble. She had to act, and fast. The subtle tactics weren't working. Grace was more resilient than she expected, and Alexander clearly didn't trust her insinuations. She needed something definitive, something that would completely destroy Grace's reputation and get her out of that house permanently. Audrey went down to her own room and opened the safe hidden behind a painting. Inside, besides documents and cash, were jewels that had belonged to Isabel. Alexander didn't have the heart to touch them, so Audrey had stored them, claiming it would be for the best until he was ready. She took out a diamond necklace, a piece Isabel wore on special occasions. It was easily worth $50,000. Her plan was forming. It was risky, but necessary. In the following days, Audrey was carefully kind to Grace. She praised her work with the girls, offered help with small tasks, created a false sense of alliance. Grace, cautious but polite, accepted the change in attitude without much analysis. On one particular morning, Audrey waited until Grace was downstairs with the girls. She went up to her room on the 3rd floor, locked the door from the inside, and quickly searched for the backpack Grace always left in a corner. She opened the main pocket and carefully placed the diamond necklace at the bottom under some books and a sweater. She looked around, making sure everything seemed untouched. Satisfied, she left the room and went downstairs, her heart beating fast. The trap was set. Now she just needed the right moment to spring it. That night, during dinner, the twins made a special request. "Daddy, we want to have a party. A barbecue in the garden with Grace, you, us, and Mrs. Gable. Like a family." Alexander looked at Grace, who seemed equally surprised. "That would be great. How about this weekend?" The girls jumped for joy. It was happening. Their plan to unite their father and Grace was working. They had no way of knowing that this weekend would be when everything fell apart, when the innocence of their plans would be destroyed by the calculated manipulation of an adult who had much more to lose than anyone imagined. Saturday dawned sunny, the kind of perfect day that seemed created especially for outdoor celebrations. The twins woke up early, too excited to sleep, and invaded Grace's room before 7 in the morning, jumping on her bed. "Grace, wake up! Today's the barbecue day!" Eleanor shouted, while Sophia laughed and tried to pull the covers off her. Grace groaned, sleepy, but smiled at the girls' excitement. All right, I'm awake. You're worse than an alarm clock." They spent the morning preparing. Mrs. Gable, the cook, had been convinced to make her special dishes. The girls helped decorate the garden with colorful lanterns they found in the storage room. Alexander set up the grill and put on soft music, playing through the outdoor speakers. Audrey watched everything with a forced smile, waiting patiently for the right moment. The necklace was planted. Now she just needed the perfect excuse to search for it. In the afternoon, when everyone gathered in the garden, there was an atmosphere of genuine happiness. Alexander grilled meats, wearing a ridiculous apron with a flamingo print that the twins had given him as a gift. Grace and the girls assembled salads at the outdoor table. Mrs. Gable brought trays of side dishes. Even Audrey participated, serving drinks and commenting on how nice it was to see the family gathered like this. The sun began to set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. After they ate, the twins insisted on playing an impromptu version of hide-and-seek in the extensive gardens. Alexander and Grace were designated as it, while the girls and Mrs. Gable were the hiders. It was during a particularly long search that Alexander and Grace found themselves alone near the gazebo at the back of the property. She was looking behind the rose bushes when he appeared on the other side. "Find anyone?" she asked, still searching. "I found you." The tone in his voice made Grace stop and look at him. Alexander was watching her in a way that made her heart race dangerously. Shouldn't we be looking for the girls? They're probably hoping we get lost. He took a step closer. Don't you think this whole game was a setup? Grace laughed softly. Probably. They're not subtle. Not at all. Alexander stopped right in front of her now, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body. Grace, I've tried. I've tried to keep my distance, to be professional, to ignore what I feel, but I can't do it anymore. Alexander, we've already discussed this. I know, but I'm tired of pretending. He raised his hand and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The girls are right. There's something between us, and I don't want to ignore it anymore. Grace closed her eyes, fighting against what she felt. This is going to complicate everything. It's already complicated, at least let's be honest about it. When she opened her eyes again, he was even closer, and then, before either of them could think better of it, their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if they were both testing unknown waters. But then it deepened. Alexander's years of loneliness and Grace's repressed needs meeting in that moment. They eventually pulled apart, both breathing heavily. Grace brought a hand to her lips, her eyes wide. We shouldn't have done that. But we did, and I don't regret it. Before she could answer, they heard giggles coming from the bushes. The twins were hidden there, watching everything. Eleanor and Sophia emerged from their hiding spot with enormous smiles on their faces. We saw, Sophia announced triumphantly. You kissed. Eleanor ran and took her father's hand. Sophia did the same with Grace. Then, in a coordinated move, they joined the two adults' hands together. We want you to be together. We want to be a real family. Alexander looked at his daughters, then at Grace, then at their joined hands. Girls, it's not that simple. Why not? Eleanor challenged. You like each other. We like Grace. Everyone's happy. What else do you need? Grace knelt to be at their level. Sweethearts, the adult world has complications. There are things you don't understand yet. Then explain it to us, Sophia requested. We're little, but we're not dumb. It was Alexander who answered, also kneeling. Grace works for me. She needs this job to help her family. If we try to have a relationship, it might look like I'm taking advantage of the situation, and I would never do that to her. But you really like each other, Eleanor insisted. We can see it. It's not like with those other women who only came here because Daddy has money. Grace touched Eleanor's face tenderly. Your father is a good man. Any woman would be lucky to be with him. But we need to think about you first, about not doing anything that might hurt you, if things don't work out. Things will work out, Sophia said with absolute certainty. We know it. From the terrace, Audrey watched the scene with growing panic. The four figures in the garden, united in that declaration of affection, represented the end of everything she had planned. She had to act now. She quickly went back inside the house and up to her room. She picked up the phone and called Alexander, forcing panic into her voice when he answered. Alexander, you need to come here right now. It's about Isabel's diamond necklace, the one in the safe. It's gone. Alexander's heart went cold. That necklace had immense sentimental value. Isabel had worn it on their wedding anniversary every year. I'm on my way. He apologized to the girls and Grace, rushing inside. Grace followed him, concerned. The twins remained in the garden, confused. In Audrey's room, she put on a perfect performance. She pointed to the open safe, to the overturned jewelry box. I came to check, like I do every week, to make sure everything's okay. The necklace isn't here. It's worth a fortune, Alexander. Not to mention the emotional value. Alexander checked for himself, his heart tight. Indeed, the necklace wasn't there. Who has access to your room? Audrey pretended to think. Well, the cleaning staff comes in here, Mrs. Gable rarely, and Grace has access to the whole house. The insinuation hung in the air. Alexander shook his head. No, Grace wouldn't do that. Alexander, I don't want to believe it either, but we have to be realistic. She's the only new person in the house. Everyone else has worked here for years. Grace, who had arrived and heard the last part, turned pale. Are you accusing me of theft? No one is accusing anyone, Audrey said with false kindness. But we need to investigate all possibilities. Maybe you saw the necklace somewhere, moved it accidentally. I've never been in your room, let alone touched your things. Audrey turned to Alexander with a sad expression. Maybe we should check all the rooms just to be sure, including hers. Alexander hesitated, caught between his trust in Grace and the value of the lost item. Grace, do you mind? I do mind. Grace felt anger and hurt rising. This is absurd, but if that's what it takes to prove my innocence, then yes, search. They went up to the third floor to Grace's room. Audrey led the search with theatrical efficiency, checking drawers, the closet under the bed. Then, with perfect timing, she opened Grace's backpack. She feigned surprise upon finding the necklace at the bottom. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. Alexander, look. Alexander saw the diamond necklace, unmistakable, glittering in the room's light. He felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. It couldn't be true. Grace wouldn't do this. But there it was, the physical evidence right in front of him. Grace was completely frozen. I didn't take that. Someone put it there. She looked at Audrey, understanding immediately. It was you. You set me up. Audrey clutched her chest, offended. What an absurd accusation. Why would I do that? Because you don't want me here. Because you're afraid of what will happen if I stay. Alexander, still holding the necklace, looked torn. Grace, please, give me an explanation. Anything that makes sense. I don't have an explanation because I didn't do it. Grace felt tears start to fall. She had been betrayed in the worst possible way. Accused of something she would never do. Someone planted that in my bag, and there's only one person in this house who would have a reason to do that. The twins appeared at the door, having heard the commotion. They saw the necklace, saw Grace's tears, saw their father's grim expression. Daddy, what's happening? Eleanor asked, frightened. Audrey hurried to escort them out. Girls, go back to your room. This is grown-up business. But Eleanor resisted, looking directly at her aunt. I saw you, last week. I saw you go into Grace's room when she was downstairs with us. You were doing something in her backpack. The silence was absolute. Audrey turned, pale. You must be mistaken, dear. I've never been in Grace's room. But I saw you, Eleanor insisted. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think it was important. You put something in her bag and left quickly. Alexander looked at his aunt, then at his daughter, then at the necklace in his hands. The uncertainty he had felt began to morph into something else. Audrey? His aunt tried to maintain her composure. The girl is confused. She's making things up to defend Grace. I'm not making it up, Eleanor shouted, frustrated at not being believed. I saw you. Alexander stood in the middle of the room, the diamond necklace still in his hands, looking between his 8-year-old daughter and his 58-year-old aunt. Doubt was a snake coiling in his chest, squeezing until it was hard to breathe. Who should he believe? The child who had been through so much trauma that she might be confusing memories, or the aunt who had cared for his family for 4 years? Audrey sensed his hesitation and seized the opportunity. Alexander, you know the girls have episodes. The therapy always mentioned that trauma can cause confusion, false memories. Eleanor is trying to help Grace because she's attached to her. It's understandable, but we can't base important decisions on a child's imagination. I'm not imagining it, Eleanor screamed, tears streaming down her face. I saw you. Why doesn't anyone believe me? Sophia ran to hug her sister, both of them crying now. Grace knelt beside them, ignoring her own tears. Girls, it's okay. I know you're trying to help. But Alexander was being pulled in opposite directions. There was the physical evidence of the necklace in Grace's backpack. There was the testimony of an 8-year-old child against an adult who had never given him reason to distrust her. There was his family, his lawyers, his social standing, all of whom would say he was being irresponsible for trusting a stranger so much. And then there was his heart, which screamed that Grace was innocent, that something was terribly wrong. But the fear of being wrong, of putting his daughters at risk, was greater. Alexander's phone rang. It was his cousin Henry, the family lawyer, returning an earlier call from Audrey. She had discreetly alerted the family to the situation, planting more seeds of doubt. Henry got straight to the point. Alexander, you need to think clearly. If this woman is stealing from you and you don't take action, there could be legal implications. Besides, She has access to your daughters. Do you really want to take that risk? The pressure was mounting from all sides. Audrey looked at him with rehearsed concern. The twins cried, clinging to Grace. And Grace, the woman he had kissed just hours before, looked at him with a mixture of hurt and understanding, as if she already knew what his decision would be. Alexander closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, his voice was controlled but distant. "Grace, I need you to gather your things and leave the house now." The impact of the words was physical. Grace stumbled back as if she'd been struck. The twins started screaming. "No, Daddy, no, you can't send her away." Eleanor grabbed her father's arm tightly. "Daddy, I'm telling the truth. Aunt Audrey put the necklace there. Why don't you believe me?" Alexander took the girls by the shoulders, trying to be firm but gentle. "I know you like Grace very much. I liked her too, but sometimes people aren't who they seem to be. I need to protect you." "You're making a mistake," Grace said, her voice breaking. "You're letting her destroy everything. And when you find out the truth, it will be too late. If you're innocent, you'll have an opportunity to prove it. But for now, I need you to leave my house." Grace looked at the twins one last time, engraving their tear-streaked faces in her memory. "I'm so sorry, girls. I'm so sorry I can't stay. But remember what we talked about pain and about moving forward. You are strong, stronger than you know." She went up to her room on the 3rd floor, with Audrey following to ensure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. Grace packed her few clothes into her suitcase, her family photos, her grandmother's rosary, everything she had brought with her when she arrived, full of hope of making a difference in those girls' lives. As she descended the stairs for the last time, the twins tried to follow, but Alexander held them back. They screamed, kicked, and pleaded. They had never thrown a tantrum of this magnitude, not even in the worst days after their mother's accident. "Please, Daddy, please don't let her go." Grace stopped at the front door and looked back one last time. Alexander avoided her gaze, focused on restraining his daughters. Audrey stood just behind him with a neutral expression, but Grace could see the barely hidden triumph in her eyes. "You're going to regret this," Grace said directly to Audrey, making sure only her aunt could hear. "And when the truth comes out, I hope what you did to these innocent children was worth it." Then she left, calling a ride-share app that would take her back to Queens, back to the small apartment, back to the reality she should have never thought she could leave. That night the twins refused to eat. They locked themselves in their room and didn't answer when Alexander knocked. He could hear them crying, a continuous devastating sound that pierced through the walls and his heart. Mrs. Gable, the cook, confronted him in the kitchen. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, I think you've made a terrible mistake. That girl was pure kindness. I've never seen anyone care for the girls with such genuine affection. You weren't here when we found the necklace, Mrs. Gable. But I was here all the other times when Mrs. Blackwood made comments about Grace, insinuations, doubts, always planting mistrust." The cook shook her head. "I've worked in this house for 15 years. I know people, and I know when something doesn't add up." Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office looking at photos of his daughters, at the necklace that had caused all of this. He tried to convince himself he had done the right thing, protected his daughters. But he couldn't shake the image of Grace's face when he asked her to leave, the absolute hurt in her eyes. In the apartment in Queens, Grace cried in her mother's arms. Sarah Miller, a 53-year-old woman worn down by a hard life, stroked her daughter's hair without asking questions. She just offered the silent comfort that mothers know how to give. Eventually, Grace told her everything. The job with the twins, the special connection they had formed, the kiss with Alexander, the setup with the necklace, the accusation, the firing. Sarah listened to it all in silence. When Grace finished, her mother said in a soft but firm voice, "Honey, you did what you could. Sometimes, no matter how much we try to help, people have to learn their own lessons. That man chose not to trust you. That's his choice to live with. But what about the girls, Mom? They're going to suffer. They'll think I abandoned them. You didn't abandon them. You were kicked out. There's a difference. And if those girls are as smart as you say, they'll know the truth in their hearts." On Sunday, the situation at the Blackwood mansion deteriorated rapidly. The twins not only refused to eat, but they also refused to speak to anyone. They sat in their room holding each other, staring out the window, as if expecting Grace to magically appear. Alexander tried to talk, to explain, to console. They ignored him completely, turning their faces away when he entered. It was as if he had become invisible to his own daughters. Audrey took on the role of caregiver again, but the girls treated her with open hostility. When she tried to approach, they screamed at her to get out. Eleanor even threw a glass of water at her when her aunt insisted they needed to eat. Dr. Harrison was called. He examined the girls and then spoke with Alexander in private. "Mr. Blackwood, they are in severe emotional shock. What happened with this Grace person?" Alexander explained, omitting details about his own feelings. The doctor sighed. "From what I understand, this young woman had formed a deep connection with your daughters. Connections like that are rare, especially for traumatized children. Removing her so abruptly was like reliving the loss of their mother. They are experiencing abandonment all over again." "But I had to protect them. She stole a valuable item from the house." "Are you absolutely certain of that? Because, from a therapeutic standpoint, the positive transformation you described in the girls since this young woman's arrival does not fit the profile of someone with malicious intent." The words echoed in Alexander's head. Was he certain? Was he really? Or had he let fear and external pressure dictate his decision? On Monday, the girls still hadn't eaten. Alexander tried all their favorite foods. Nothing. Sophia had a crying fit so intense she threw up, but since there was nothing in her stomach, it was just painful spasms. Eleanor, always the more vocal one, finally spoke. A single sentence before returning to silence. "You made the wrong choice, Daddy. You chose to believe the wrong person." Alexander felt those words like knives. His daughters looked at him no longer with love or trust, but with profound disappointment. He had failed them at the most crucial moment. By Tuesday, the situation was critical. The girls were weak, pale, dehydrated. Alexander was desperate. Audrey suggested more drastic intervention, perhaps forced hospitalization, medication to calm them. But Alexander finally started to notice something. Whenever he mentioned bringing Grace back, the girls reacted. Their eyes would light up briefly. It was the only thing that elicited any response. That night, alone in his office, Alexander finally did what he should have done from the start. He went to the house's security system and began reviewing the camera footage. There were cameras in all the main hallways, though not inside the rooms for privacy. He found the footage from the previous week. He saw Audrey going up to the third floor, something she rarely did. He saw her looking around furtively before entering Grace's room. She was inside for less than 2 minutes. When she came out, she had nothing in her hands, but her face showed satisfaction. Alexander felt nausea rising. Eleanor had been right. His 8-year-old daughter had seen and reported the truth, and he hadn't believed her. He kept investigating, this time focusing on the household finances that Audrey managed. He began to notice discrepancies, payments to Dr. Harrison that seemed far too high, therapy sessions he didn't remember the girls attending, specialized treatments that had never been discussed with him. He called Dr. Harrison directly. "Doctor, how many sessions exactly have my daughters had with you over the past 4 years?" The doctor checked his records. "Well, for the first 2 years they came weekly, after that monthly. In the last year, only occasionally when you called concerned about a crisis. Why?" Alexander looked at the invoices Audrey had presented. They showed continuous weekly sessions, extra treatments, experimental therapies. All fake. He did a quick calculation, and the number was staggering. $300,000, maybe more. His aunt had been stealing from him for years. And when Grace appeared and threatened this scheme by bringing the possibility of him remarrying, of a new wife auditing the finances, Audrey had panicked and staged the scene with the necklace. Alexander felt as if the world was crumbling. He had accused an innocent woman. He had fired someone who genuinely loved his daughters. He had ignored the testimony of his own child, and now Eleanor and Sophia were wasting away because of him, because of his cowardice, his failure to trust the right people. He had to fix this, but first, he had to find Grace and beg for her forgiveness. On Wednesday morning, Alexander called a meeting with his lawyers and accountant. He presented all the evidence he had gathered during the sleepless night. The security footage showing Audrey sneaking into Grace's room, the financial discrepancies, the fake invoices for psychological treatment. The accountant turned pale as he reviewed the numbers. "Mr. Blackwood, this is embezzlement on a significant scale. We're talking about over $300,000 siphoned off over 4 years. Each transaction was disguised as a legitimate medical expense for your daughters." Henry, his lawyer cousin, shook his head in disbelief. "Alexander, your aunt could go to prison for this. Do you really want to go down this path? She's family. She stole from me. Worse, she framed an innocent woman and is killing my daughters. Family doesn't do that." Alexander ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I want all legal measures taken. I want her confronted and held accountable. And what about the young woman who was accused, Grace Miller? I need to find her. I need to bring her back." Alexander looked out his office window at the garden where just days ago they had been happy. "My daughters haven't eaten since she left. They've been on a silent hunger strike for 4 days. The doctor said if this continues, we'll have to hospitalize them for intravenous feeding." The lawyers began working immediately. Meanwhile, Alexander got Grace's address from the cleaning agency that had originally sent her, an apartment in Queens, in a simple neighborhood far from the luxury of the Upper East Side. Before leaving, Alexander went up to the twins' room. They were lying on the shared bed, holding each other, as they always did when they were scared. Their faces were pale, their eyes sunken with dark circles. 4 days without food had left visible marks. "Girls," he said softly, kneeling beside the bed, "I made a terrible mistake. You were right. Eleanor, you saw the truth and I didn't believe you. Can you forgive me?" Eleanor turned her face away, but Sophia looked at him with teary eyes. "Are you going to bring Grace back?" "I'm going to try. I'll beg if I have to, but I don't know if she'll want to come back after what we did to her." "She has to come back," Eleanor said, her back still to him. "She promised she wouldn't leave. But you sent her away." "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life fixing that mistake." Alexander gently stroked his daughter's hair. "Please, eat something. Anything. You're scaring me." "We'll only eat when she comes back," Sophia said with a determination that shouldn't exist in such a frail child. "It's the only thing we have to show that she matters." Alexander left with a broken heart. His daughters were literally letting themselves waste away for someone he had unjustly expelled. The guilt was overwhelming. He found Audrey in the living room drinking tea as if nothing was wrong. Seeing him, she smiled. "Alexander, how are the girls? Perhaps we should call that eating disorder specialist I mentioned." "You won't be doing anything more for my daughters." Alexander kept his voice controlled, cold. "Get out of my house now." Audrey's smile faltered. "What are you saying?" "I know everything. The embezzled money, the fake invoices, the setup with the necklace, everything." He threw a folder with the evidence onto the coffee table. "My lawyers are preparing formal charges as we speak. You have 2 options. Leave now peacefully, or be escorted out by the police." Audrey's face went through several expressions. Shock, denial, panic, and finally, rage. "You can't prove anything. It's all just coincidence. I have you on video entering Grace's room. I have all the financial discrepancies documented. I have the testimony of my 8-year-old daughter, whom you tried to discredit. It's over, Audrey." His aunt stood up abruptly. "After everything I've done for you, I took care of this house, I took care of these children when you were lost in your grief. You stole from me, you destroyed an innocent woman's life, and you almost killed my daughters with your greed and manipulation." Alexander pointed to the door. "Leave before I completely lose my patience." Audrey grabbed her purse with trembling hands. "You'll regret this. I'll fight it. I'll prove I was protecting this family from that gold digger. Do what you want, but do it far away from my house and my daughters." She left, slamming the door. Alexander waited until he heard her car leaving the garage before grabbing his own keys. Mrs. Gable appeared from the hallway. "Are you going to get Grace, sir?" "I'm going to try. I don't know if she'll forgive me." "She will. For the girl's sake, if not for yours. That young woman has too good a heart to let 2 children suffer." The cook touched his arm. but you're going to have to work very hard to win back her trust, sir. The New York traffic was chaotic as always, but Alexander barely noticed. His mind was focused on how to apologize, how to explain, how to beg Grace to come back. The address led him to an old 5-story building, no elevator, with peeling paint and barred windows. The contrast with his mansion was brutal. He climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door of apartment 307. An older woman, clearly Grace's mother from the similar facial features, opened the door. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized him. "You have some nerve showing up here." "Ma'am, I need to speak with Grace, please. It's urgent." "Urgent for you. My daughter has spent the last few days crying because of what you did to her. I know. And I'm here to apologize and to beg her to come back. My daughters have been on a hunger strike for 4 days. They're going to end up in the hospital if they don't eat soon." Sarah Miller hesitated, then sighed. "Grace isn't here. She went out to look for work. She can't sit still. Says she needs to keep busy so she doesn't think. Please, can you give me her number? Or tell me where she went?" The mother studied Alexander for a long moment. Finally, she took a piece of paper and wrote down an address. She went to drop off her resume at some houses in Greenwich Village. "Start there, but if you hurt her again, you won't get my politeness next time. Thank you, and I'm sorry, truly." Alexander drove to Greenwich Village, a bohemian neighborhood full of art galleries and colorful townhouses. He spent nearly 2 hours searching, asking at employment agencies, showing Grace's photo on his phone to people on the street. Finally, he saw her leaving a house with a help wanted sign. She wore simple clothes, her hair in its practical bun, and carried her folder of resumes. When she saw him, she stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was careful, guarded. "I found out the truth. Everything." Alexander approached slowly. "Audrey planted the necklace. She's been embezzling money for years. Eleanor was right about everything, and I didn't believe her. I'm so sorry, Grace. More than words can say." Grace crossed her arms. "Sorry doesn't undo what you did. It doesn't undo the fact that you chose to believe her word over mine, that you ignored your own daughter. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for what I did." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "But the girls, Grace, they haven't eaten since you left. 4 days. They're wasting away. The doctor said they'll need to be hospitalized if this continues." Grace's eyes immediately filled with tears. "Are they okay?" "No, they're terrible. Weak, dehydrated, desperate. They say they'll only eat when you come back. And you came here because your daughters are suffering, not because you trust me or because you care about me." "I came because all of those things are true." Alexander took another step. "I trust you, completely. I should have trusted you from the start. And I do care. More than I should, more than is appropriate given the circumstances. But more important than all of that, my daughters need you. They love you. And they're going to keep hurting themselves until you come back." Grace angrily wiped her tears. "You can't just show up here and expect me to come back like nothing happened. You humiliated me. You accused me of theft. You threw me out of your house like I was trash. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you give me the chance. But right now, at this moment, I'm begging you. Not for me. For the girls. They are slowly killing themselves, and only you can stop it. Why should I believe you? How do I know this isn't another setup?" Alexander took out his phone and showed her the photos he had taken of the twins that morning. Grace brought a hand to her mouth when she saw how pale, weak, and desolate they looked. Tears were falling freely now. "They're like this because of me. They're like this because I made a horrible mistake, because I failed them and I failed you. Please, Grace, come back, at least until they recover. After that, if you want to leave and never see me again, I'll understand and respect that. But the girls need you now." Grace was silent for a long moment, looking at the photos, at Alexander, at the uncertain future. Finally, she nodded. "I'll come back, but not for you, for the girls. And I want everything documented. A formal contract, witnesses, everything. I won't be vulnerable again. Whatever you want, thank you." "God, thank you." They drove back to the mansion in tense silence. When they arrived, Alexander led Grace straight to the twins' room. He opened the door slowly. "Girls, there's someone here who wants to see you." Grace entered, and for a moment, everyone was frozen. Then Eleanor and Sophia started to cry, reaching out their arms. Grace ran to the bed and hugged them, the three of them crying together. "You came back," Eleanor sobbed. "You really came back." "I promised I wouldn't abandon you," Grace said, stroking their hair, "and I always keep my promises. I'm sorry it took so long." "Did Daddy find out Aunt Audrey lied?" Sophia asked. "He did. She did some very bad things and she's not coming back here anymore." The twins finally pulled away from the hug. "Grace, we're so hungry." "Then let's eat." Grace smiled through her tears. "What do you want?" "Everything." Mrs. Gable prepared a light but nutritious meal: vegetable soup, fresh bread, cut fruit. The twins ate slowly at first, their stomachs protesting the food after 4 empty days. Grace stayed by their side the whole time, encouraging every spoonful, celebrating every small victory. Alexander watched from the doorway, relieved but aware that Grace barely looked in his direction. All her attention was on the girls, as if he no longer existed. It was less than he deserved, he knew that, but it hurt all the same. After the girls finished eating, the family doctor was called to examine them. Dr. Mendez arrived quickly, concern etched on his face. He had cared for the twins since the accident and had a special affection for them. 4 days without food, he murmured as he checked their vital signs. "You two are as stubborn as your father. We'll need to carefully monitor the reintroduction of food, dehydration, possible electrolyte imbalances." He looked at Alexander. "They'll need daily checkups for the next few days. If there's any sign of complication, immediate hospitalization." "I'll do whatever it takes," Alexander replied. The doctor then noticed Grace sitting on the bed between the girls who refused to let her go. "You must be the young woman they wouldn't stop asking for. I'm Dr. Mendez. Grace Miller. A pleasure." "The pleasure is mine. Whatever happened to make these girls stop eating, the fact that you're here now has clearly resolved it." He smiled gently. "They're going to need a lot of care and affection in the coming weeks. I hope you'll be staying. I'll stay for as long as necessary." That night, the twins insisted that Grace sleep in their room, on the sofa bed in the corner. They were afraid that if she left their sight, she would disappear again. Grace agreed, understanding the additional trauma her abrupt departure had caused. Alexander came to say goodnight, but the girls barely acknowledged him, absorbed in having Grace back. He tried not to let the hurt show. He knew he would have to work. Very hard to regain not only Grace's trust, but also the full respect of his daughters. The next morning, Alexander's lawyers filed a formal complaint against Audrey: embezzlement, fraud, defamation. The evidence was solid: security videos, financial documents, Eleanor's testimony, all built an irrefutable case. Audrey was arrested at her home on Thursday afternoon. The news spread quickly through the elite social circles of New York. The aunt of businessman Alexander Blackwood, arrested for stealing over $300,000 from her own family. The scandal was juicy, the kind of story that would dominate conversations at exclusive clubs for weeks. But it was what came next that turned the case into a national phenomenon. The full story leaked to the press, not just the theft, but the setup against Grace, the innocent housekeeper who had transformed the lives of the traumatized twins, the girls' hunger strike, the millionaire businessman who almost lost everything for not believing the right woman. The tabloids loved it. Millionaire accuses housekeeper of theft, but criminal was his own aunt. Unlikely cross-class love almost destroyed by greed. 8-year-old twins go on hunger strike until caregiver returns. Reports appeared daily. Some supported Grace, others questioned her intentions. There were those who said Alexander was being naive, that women like Grace always had hidden motives. There were those who championed true love above social differences. Grace tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. Colleagues from old jobs were interviewed. Neighbors from Queens gave statements. Her private life was exposed for the entire country to dissect and judge. Her mother called, worried. "Honey, this is getting too big. Maybe you should leave that house before it gets worse." "I can't, Mom. The girls are still fragile." Grace looked at Eleanor and Sophia sleeping together in the bed. They need stability right now. I can't abandon them again. And that man, Alexander? Grace was silent. I'm here for the girls. Only for them. But that was only half the truth, and they both knew it. There were feelings there, complicated and confusing, that Grace wasn't ready to face. Alexander tried to get closer, but Grace maintained a strict professional distance. She cared for the twins with total dedication, but she treated Alexander with polite formality. Mr. Blackwood this, Mr. Blackwood that. Never Alexander again. Never that ease they had shared. A week after Grace's return, Alexander found her alone, in the library late at night. She was reading, enjoying a rare moment of quiet while the girls slept. "May I come in?" he asked from the door. "It's your house." He sat in a nearby chair, but not too close. "Grace, I know you're only here for the girls, and I'm eternally grateful for that, but I'd like to explain." "Explain what? That you didn't trust me? That you believed planted evidence instead of your own instincts?" She closed the book with more force than necessary. "Or that you ignored your 8-year-old daughter when she tried to tell you the truth? All of it." Alexander leaned forward, hands clasped. "There's no excuse for what I did. But I want you to understand the context, not to forgive me, but to comprehend. I'm listening. When Isabel was gone, I fell apart, completely. The girls saw the accident, they were traumatized, and I didn't know how to help them because I could barely help myself. Audrey stepped in and took over everything, the house, the finances, the care of the girls. I trusted her blindly because I was drowning and she seemed to be the only life raft. That doesn't justify it. I know, but it explains it. 4 years of learning to depend on her, to believe she had the family's best interests at heart. And then you came along, changed everything in a matter of weeks. And that scared not only Audrey, but it scared me too. Why did it scare you? Because it meant change. It meant admitting that maybe I could have something beyond grief and responsibility, that maybe I could feel something for someone again." Alexander looked at her directly, and when Audrey planted that doubt, it was easier to believe her than to face what I was starting to feel for you. Grace was silent for a long moment. "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the accusation, it wasn't being thrown out. It was seeing that you didn't fight for me. Not even a little. You just accepted the easiest version and sent me away. You're right, I was a coward. And now?" She stood up, walking to the window. "Now that the truth is out, that Audrey is in jail, that your reputation is tarnished in the social circles you frequent, what do you want? For me to pretend everything is fine? To trust you again as if nothing happened? I just want a chance to prove I deserve your trust. Not now, I understand it's too soon, but eventually." He approached but kept a respectful distance. "And I want you to know that, regardless of what happens between us, you will always have a place here. Because of the girls, yes, but also because you deserve it. Your salary is tripled starting today, with a formal contract as you asked. Full benefits, security. Are you trying to buy me? I'm trying to ensure you never feel vulnerable again like you did when I fired you. Money can't buy forgiveness, I know that, but it can buy security, and you deserve to feel secure." Grace turned to face him. "I'll accept the salary because I'm practical and my family needs it. But forgiveness, trust, that's going to take time. A long time. I have all the time it takes. And your feelings? The ones you mentioned? I'll keep them to myself. I won't pressure you. I won't make you uncomfortable. You're here for the girls, and I respect that. Good, because I'm not ready for anything more than that." But there was something in her eyes, a spark that contradicted her words. Alexander saw it and clung to that small hope like a castaway to a piece of driftwood. The following weeks established a new routine. Grace cared for the twins with absolute dedication. They started eating normally again, regained their lost weight, started smiling and playing again. Therapy with Dr. Mendez continued, but now focused on processing the additional trauma of the hunger strike and Grace's temporary departure. Alexander worked during the day, but always came home for dinner with the family. He and Grace maintained polite, functional conversations, but there was an invisible wall between them. The twins noticed and didn't like it. "Why aren't you friends with Grace anymore?" Sophia asked one night as he was tucking them in. "I am her friend, sweetheart. But you don't talk to her like you used to. You don't laugh, you don't look at her that way." "What way?" "The way you look at Mommy in the old pictures." Alexander's heart ached. "Sometimes, when grown-ups make mistakes, it takes time to fix them. I'm giving Grace that time." "But you still like her?" "Very much. But she needs to decide. If she can forgive me first." Eleanor, always the more pragmatic one, intervened. "Daddy, you have to work harder. Show her you've changed. Words are easy. Actions are hard." "When did you get so wise?" The girl shrugged. "You learn things when you go through bad situations." And it was true. His daughters had matured prematurely, forced by circumstances to develop an emotional perception beyond their years. Alexander wanted to protect them from this forced maturation, but he also recognized they were stronger for it. Alexander began his subtle campaign of reconquest, following his own daughter's advice. Actions, not words. He paid attention to the small details. He noticed Grace liked herbal tea at night, so he started leaving a cup ready for her. He realized she loved to read, so he discreetly stocked the library with new books he thought she would enjoy. When he found out Grace's mother needed gallbladder surgery, he arranged for the best surgeon in New York and paid for everything, including the private hospital and recovery. Grace tried to refuse, but he insisted it was the least he could do. "This doesn't change anything between us," she said, when he mentioned the medical arrangements. "I don't expect it to. Your mother needs proper care, let me help." She accepted, but maintained her emotional distance. The external pressures, however, continued to grow. Alexander's friends, people from his social circle, didn't understand his insistence on keeping Grace in the house, especially after all the public scandal. Frank Thompson, a fellow businessman, was particularly blunt during a business lunch. "Alexander, you're becoming a joke at the clubs, a businessman of your caliber involved with the housekeeper. It damages your image, your credibility in business." "Grace is no longer a housekeeper. She is my daughter's caregiver. And frankly, Frank, I don't care what they say at the clubs. You should care. Your reputation affects your contracts, your business. Think strategically." "I do think strategically, and strategically my daughter's happiness is worth more than any contract." Frank shook his head, giving up. But there were others who thought the same. The mothers of the twins' classmates whispered when Grace showed up to pick them up from school, the cutting remarks disguised as concern. "Are you sure it's appropriate for her to be so involved with your daughters? What exactly is the nature of your relationship? You're living together, aren't you?" Grace felt the weight of these looks, these comments. One afternoon, she returned from the school particularly downcast. The twins went straight to their room to do homework, and Grace went to the kitchen for water. Alexander found her there, immediately noticing her expression. "Did something happen?" "Just the school parents being school parents." She filled a glass of water and drank it quickly. "It's nothing I can't handle." "What did they say?" Grace hesitated, then decided to be honest. "That I'm a gold digger taking advantage of a vulnerable widower. That I'm using your daughters as a path to your money. That you're making a mistake keeping someone like me around." She placed the glass in the sink with more force than she intended. "The usual variations." Alexander felt anger boiling. "Who was it?" "I'll talk to them." "It's no use. They're people from your world, Alexander. A world I'll never fully belong to, no matter how much money you pay me or how many formal contracts we sign." "Then damn that world." He took a step closer. "The only people who matter in this situation are you, me, and the girls. The rest is noise. Easy for you to say. You were born into that world. You can afford to ignore it because you know you'll always belong. I don't have that security." Before Alexander could reply, Eleanor appeared at the kitchen door. "Grace, can you help me with math? I don't understand division." Grace forced a smile. "Of course, sweetie, let's go." She left without looking at Alexander again, leaving him alone with his frustrations and the growing awareness that winning Grace back would be harder than he had imagined. That night, after the girls were asleep, Alexander went to the living room where he knew He would find Grace reading. She looked up when he entered but said nothing. "May I sit?" "It's your house." He sat in the chair opposite her. "Grace, I was thinking, maybe we should make it public that you're no longer a housekeeper, but the girl's official tutor. With credentials, references, everything formal and documented. It might help silence some of the comments. You want to turn me into something more palatable for your friends. I want to give you the tools to defend yourself against the prejudiced idiots who can't see past a person's origins. And what if I don't want to defend myself? What if I'm tired of having to prove my worth to people who have already decided I'm worthless?" Alexander fell silent, realizing something deeper was going on. "You're thinking of leaving." It wasn't a question. Grace closed her book and finally looked directly at him. "Every day I wake up and wonder how long I can take it. Being judged, being the subject of gossip, being seen as the gold digger who seduced the rich widower. It's exhausting. The girls will be devastated. I know. That's why I'm still here." She ran a hand over her face, tired. "But Alexander, I need you to understand something. I'm not just keeping my distance because I'm hurt by you. I'm keeping my distance because anything between us will validate exactly what these people are saying. That I was after your money from the beginning. Who cares what they think? You care. Your business cares. And eventually the girls will grow up and hear these stories, and they'll have to deal with people's judgment about their father's choice. So you're giving up before we even try? I'm being realistic." She stood up, walking to the window. "You live in a world of privilege you don't even realize. You can ignore gossip because your position is secure. But me? Every day I'm reminded that I don't belong here. And honestly, I don't know if I want to belong to a place where people are so cruel. Grace, there are good people too. Mrs. Gable adores you. Dr. Mendez respects you. And the girls love you more than anything. I know. And that's what keeps me here. Not you. Not the possibility of us. Them." The words hurt, but Alexander couldn't blame her. He had destroyed her trust, and now the world was destroying her self-confidence. He had to find a way to rebuild both. In the following days, Alexander took drastic measures. He began refusing social invitations from people he had heard making comments about Grace. When Frank called for dinner, he was direct. "I can't go out with someone who disrespects a person I consider essential to my family. When you're ready to get to know Grace for real, without prejudice, we can talk again." He organized a dinner at the mansion and invited only the people who had been kind and respectful. Dr. Mendez, Mrs. Gable, and her family, a few neighbors who had always treated Grace with dignity. It was a small but warm evening where Grace finally felt accepted. Eleanor and Sophia helped in their own ways. When a classmate commented that their caregiver was weird for living with them, Sophia replied with the brutal honesty of children, "Grace is the nicest person we know. If you have a problem with that, the problem is yours, not hers." The story circulated among the parents, some scandalized, others secretly admiring the 8-year-old's courage. Slowly, very slowly, Grace began to lower her defenses. She noticed Alexander's efforts, the way he was actively choosing her over social expectations, the way he defended her reputation, how he created spaces where she felt comfortable. One night, 6 weeks after her return, they met again in the library. This time, it was Grace who initiated the conversation. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you doing all this? Cutting social ties, changing your life, fighting against what everyone expects of you. Why is this so important?" He set aside the laptop he was working on. "Because for the first time in 4 years I feel alive again. Not just functioning, not just surviving. Alive. And that's because of you, because of the way you see the world, how you care for my daughters, how you're not intimidated by money or status. You could find that in other people, people from your world. But I don't want other people, I want you." He stood up and walked to where she was. "And I know I'm still proving I deserve a chance. I know I broke your trust in a terrible way, but I'm willing to spend however long it takes showing you that I've changed, that I've learned, that I will never doubt you like that again." Grace felt tears begin to form. "You don't understand how much it hurt, not just the accusation, but realizing I had started to fall for you and then discovering you didn't trust me enough. I trust you, completely. And as for falling in love, he hesitated, then decided on total honesty. I fell in love too. Before the kiss, before everything fell apart. I fell in love with the way you talk to the girls, how you read stories, how you find joy in simple things. I fell in love with the person you are, not despite your background, but including it. Alexander. I know it's too soon for these declarations, but you asked me why I'm fighting so hard. That's the answer. Because you are worth every effort, every social sacrifice, every change I need to make. Grace wiped away the tears that were now falling freely. I want to believe you. I so badly want to believe this can work. Then believe it. Give me that chance. It doesn't have to be now. It doesn't have to be fast. But give me the possibility. She was silent for a long moment, struggling with herself. Finally, she nodded slowly. One chance, but slowly. And if you ever doubt me again, if you don't defend me when things get tough, it's over. No second chances after that. Understood. And Grace, thank you for not giving up on me completely even when I deserved it. She smiled for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile that lit up her face. It must be because I've spent too much time with those stubborn daughters of yours. Their stubbornness is rubbing off. The following months were a careful dance of reconstruction. Alexander and Grace began spending more time together, always with the twins nearby at first, then gradually finding moments alone. Long conversations in the library after the girls slept, walks in the garden at dawn, shared coffees before the day truly began. Eleanor and Sophia watched everything with growing approval. They had become unlikely cupids, constantly creating situations that forced their father and Grace to be together. They would purposefully forget to do tasks, so the two would have to go buy supplies together. They asked for both of them to take them to the park. They insisted Grace join their father for dinner even when they had already eaten. Alexander was patient, respecting the boundaries Grace set. He didn't attempt kisses or romantic gestures without clear permission. He built trust through consistency, showing day after day that he had changed, that he was actively choosing her over everything else. It was Grace who finally took the next step. 3 months after their conversation in the library, she found him alone in the office working late. She knocked on the ajar door. "Can I interrupt?" "Always." He saved his document and gave her his full attention. Grace entered and closed the door behind her, a deliberate gesture that did not go unnoticed. She walked to the desk but didn't sit. "I was thinking about us, about this chance I gave you." He tensed, bracing for bad news. "Yes?" "I think you've proved your point." She smiled, and there was nervousness but also certainty in her eyes. 3 months of you choosing me every day, defending me, respecting me. I think it's time to stop being afraid and really try. Alexander stood up slowly, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure. I'm still scared of what people will say, of the complications that will come, but I've realized something." She took a step closer. Living in fear of being judged isn't really living. And you've shown me that you're willing to face this world by my side, not in front, protecting me as if I'm fragile, but beside me as a partner. You are not fragile. You are the strongest person I know. Then stop standing there and kiss me. Alexander needed no further invitation. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was different from the first one in the garden. That one had been hesitant, exploratory. This one was a promise, a declaration, a commitment to everything they would build together. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. Grace rested her forehead against his, smiling. "The girls are going to be impossible when they find out. They probably already know. I think they have secret cameras hidden around the house." Grace laughed, a sound Alexander realized he had missed without knowing it. "So what do we do now?" "Now, we do this the right way. Dinners, conversations, getting to know our families properly, building something solid before thinking about next steps. And the girls, I think we can tell them tomorrow, officially. Make it clear that we're trying something, but that it will be slow and careful. They'll want a wedding immediately. Probably, but we'll go at our own pace. The conversation with the twins the next morning was exactly as expected. Eleanor and Sophia screamed with joy, jumped on the bed, hugged both their father and Grace with enough force to suffocate them. "We knew it. We knew it would work out," Sophia sang as she danced around the room. "When's the wedding?" Eleanor asked with her usual practicality. "Easy now," Alexander tried to control their excitement. "We're just starting to date. Marriage is something that takes time." "But you are going to get married, right?" they both asked anxiously. Grace knelt to be at their level. "Sweethearts, your father and I like each other very much, and we want to build something together. But we need to make sure we do everything right. Take our time. For you too. We want any big decision we make to be right for all of us as a family." "Mommy would have liked you," Eleanor said suddenly, surprising everyone. "She always said love was about finding someone who makes you want to be better. You do that with us, with Daddy. She would approve." Alexander felt tears burn his eyes. It was the first time the girls had mentioned their mother in a positive context without paralyzing pain. It was progress, healing happening in real time. "Thank you, sweetie. That means a lot to me." The following months were a period of discovery. Alexander and Grace learned about each other at a steady pace. He discovered she sang in the shower, always, off-key but with adorable enthusiasm. She discovered he had a hidden talent for cooking, something he never showed because Mrs. Gable was so territorial about the kitchen. They introduced their families. Sarah Miller, initially suspicious of Alexander, was won over by his genuine reverence for her daughter and his respect for their family's humble origins. Grace's younger brothers were impressed by the mansion, but more impressed that Alexander knew how to play video games and didn't mind losing to teenagers. Alexander's extended family was more complicated. Some accepted Grace immediately, charmed by her authenticity. Others maintained a polite distance, clearly disapproving but lacking the courage to confront Alexander directly after the scandal with Audrey. Audrey, speaking of her, was convicted, 2 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud. The sentence was relatively light due to her age and lack of a criminal record, but the public humiliation was devastating. The woman who once circulated in the best clubs in New York was now a persona non grata in all of them. Alexander felt no joy at her downfall, only a deep sadness for the waste. Audrey had had everything, a family that loved her, a respectable position, security, and she threw it all away for greed. 6 months of dating turned into 8, then 10. Alexander knew what he wanted, but he was waiting for the right moment. He didn't want to rush Grace, didn't want her to feel pressured. It was during a family trip to the coast that he realized the time had come. They rented a beach house in the Hamptons, far from the prying eyes of New York. It was early December, the twins were on school vacation, and everyone desperately needed time to just be a family without external judgment. On the last night of the trip, after the girls had fallen asleep exhausted from a full day at the beach, Alexander asked Grace to join him for a walk. The moon was full, illuminating the white sand in an almost magical way. They walked hand in hand in comfortable silence. Finally, Alexander stopped and turned to her. "Grace, there's something I want to ask you." She looked at him curiously, not yet realizing. "You can ask." Alexander knelt in the sand, pulling a small box from his pocket. Grace brought her hands to her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "Over the last few months, you have transformed not only my life, but my daughter's lives in ways I didn't even know were possible. You taught us to love again, to trust again, to be a family again, and I don't want to spend a single day of the rest of my life without you." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "I chose an emerald because it's the color of your eyes and the girl's eyes, a symbol of how you've become an inseparable part of us. Grace Miller, will you marry me?" Grace was crying openly now, but she managed to nod. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slid the ring onto her finger and stood up, pulling her into a deep kiss. When they pulled apart, they heard applause. They turned to see Eleanor and Sophia on the balcony of the beach house, having woken up and witnessed the whole thing. "Were you spying?" Alexander called out, more amused than annoyed. "We wanted to make sure you didn't mess it up," Eleanor shouted back. Everyone laughed, and then the girls ran across the beach to hug them. There, under the full moon, 4 people who had been broken found themselves whole, not in the way they expected, not following the script society dictated, but in a way that was their own, and perfect for them. "When's the wedding?" Sophia asked for the 1,000th time. Alexander looked at Grace, who smiled. "How about in 4 months? Enough time to plan something beautiful but simple." "Can we be flower girls?" Eleanor asked hopefully. "You will be the most important flower girls that have ever existed," Grace promised. "Because without you two, none of this would have happened. You were the first to believe we could be a family." "And you were right," Alexander added, hugging his 3 girls. "You were always right." The 4 months of wedding preparation passed in a whirlwind of activity. Grace and Alexander decided on an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, the same place where they had first kissed. It would be just close family and true friends, the people who really mattered. Eleanor and Sophia participated in every detail of the planning. They chose their own flower girl dresses, white with green sashes to match Grace's engagement ring. They helped select the flowers, insisted on having a chocolate, cake because it was everyone's favorite. They created handmade invitations that were technically imperfect but beautiful in their sincerity. Sarah Miller cried when Grace asked her to walk her down the aisle. "I always dreamed of doing this for your father," her mother said, drying her tears. "To do it for you is an even greater honor." The wedding day dawned perfectly. It was late April, autumn in New York, with a mild temperature and a cloudless blue sky. The garden had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, floral arrangements in shades of white, green, and gold, delicate chairs arranged in a semicircle around an impromptu altar under the gazebo. Grace got ready in the room she now shared with Alexander, surrounded by her mother, siblings, and the twins who couldn't stand still from excitement. Her dress was simple but elegant, with no frills, just a perfect cut that enhanced her natural beauty. She wore her hair down in soft waves, a crown of white flowers, the only adornment besides her engagement ring. "You look beautiful," Eleanor declared with absolute conviction. "Daddy is going to cry." "He cries easily," Sophia added with a laugh. "He cried watching that dog movie." The other day, the girls were radiant in their flower girl dresses, carrying small baskets of rose petals. They were 10 now, taller, more mature, but still the same stubborn, loving twins who had brought this unlikely family together. Downstairs, Alexander waited at the altar, his heart racing. He wore a navy blue suit, a green tie to match the theme. Beside him was Henry, his cousin and best man, who had become an enthusiastic supporter of the relationship after getting to know Grace properly. The guests were few but significant: Mrs. Gable and her family, Dr. Mendez and his wife, a few kind neighbors, colleagues from Alexander's work who had respected Grace from the beginning, Grace's childhood friends from Queens, her mother and siblings. It was an eclectic gathering that would never happen in a normal context. But there, in that garden, they were all just people celebrating love. The music began. Eleanor and Sophia walked down the petal-strewn aisle first, throwing roses with perhaps excessive but charming enthusiasm. Then Grace appeared, arm in arm with her mother. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. She was absolutely stunning, not because of an expensive dress or professional makeup, but because of the happiness she radiated, the confidence in her step, the way she looked at him as if he were the only man in the world. When Sarah Miller gave her daughter to Alexander, she whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Take good care of her. She's suffered enough in her life." "With my entire life," Alexander promised. The ceremony was short but emotional. The traditional vows were supplemented by personal ones they had both written. Alexander spoke of second chances, of learning to trust again, of how Grace had taught him that love wasn't about perfection, but about choosing someone every day despite imperfections. Grace spoke of courage, of how Alexander had shown her she deserved a love that didn't apologize for existing, of how the twins had taught her that family isn't just blood, but choice and commitment. There was laughter when Eleanor declared a little too loudly that they were finally going to stop messing around. There were tears when Sophia read a short poem about butterflies and metamorphosis she had written especially for the occasion, and then the officiant pronounced the words everyone was waiting for. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alexander needed no more encouragement. He pulled Grace into a deep kiss as everyone applauded. The twins ran up and hugged them, turning the kiss into a four-person family embrace. The reception was a lively but intimate party. Live music, dancing in the garden, delicious food prepared by Mrs. Gable with the help of professional caterers. The children ran free, the adults talked and laughed, and for the first time in a long time, there was only joy without the shadows of judgment. During the couple's first dance, Alexander whispered in Grace's ear, "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood." She smiled against his shoulder. "Immensely, though I'm still getting used to the new last name. You can use Miller Blackwood if you prefer. You don't have to erase who you were." "I know. But I like Blackwood. I like being part of this family officially. You were always a part. Today we just made it official." They danced in silence for a few moments, absorbing the moment. Then Grace said softly, "There's something I need to tell you." Alexander pulled her back slightly to look at her face. "Are you okay? Are you worried?" "I'm great, better than great, actually." She bit her lip, nervous but excited. "I found out last week, but I wanted to wait until today to tell you. I'm pregnant, Alexander. We're going to have a baby." Alexander stopped dancing completely. For a moment, he just stared at her, processing the words. Then a huge smile spread across his face. "Really? Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I took 3 tests, all positive. I'm almost 8 weeks along." He lifted her up and spun her around, laughing out loud with pure joy. The people around them stopped to watch, curious. Alexander gently set Grace down and kissed her again. Eleanor and Sophia ran up to them. "What happened? Why are you so happy?" Alexander looked at Grace, who nodded. He knelt to be at the girls' level. "Girls, you're going to be big sisters. Grace is having a baby." The silence was absolute for 3 seconds. Then the twins screamed so loud they were probably heard 3 blocks away. They jumped, hugged Grace carefully, then their father, then Grace again. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Sophia asked immediately. "It's too early to know yet, but in a few months we'll find out." "It doesn't matter," Eleanor declared. "We'll love it either way, and we're going to be the best big sisters in the world." The news spread through the party quickly. More hugs, more happy tears, more celebrations. Sarah Miller hugged her daughter for long minutes, whispering blessings and prayers. Mrs. Gable was already planning nutritious meals for pregnant women out loud. When the party finally ended and the last guests had left, the family of 4, soon to be 5, was left alone in the still-decorated garden. The twins were exhausted but happy, sitting on the grass in their flower girl dresses, already stained with cake and dirt. This was the best day, Sophia declared, lying down completely on the grass to look at the stars that were beginning to appear. "It was perfect," Eleanor agreed, joining her sister. Alexander and Grace sat with them, forming an informal circle. They looked up together at the gradually darkening sky. "Do you think Mommy is watching?" Eleanor asked softly, for the first time in months mentioning Isabel without obvious pain. Alexander considered the question carefully. "I believe so, and I think she's happy for us. Your mother always wanted you to be happy, to have love in your lives." "And she wouldn't mind that you found someone new?" Sophia asked. It was Grace who answered. "People who truly love us want our happiness, even when they can't be with us. Your mother will always be a part of you, of your family's story. But that doesn't mean there can't be room for new chapters, new people, new love." "Like in the book you read to us," Eleanor said, "where the princess loses her mother but finds a new family and both loves live together in her heart." "Exactly like that." They lay there for a while longer, talking about the baby to come, about the future, about dreams and possibilities. Eventually the twins fell asleep right there on the grass, exhausted from the exciting day. Alexander carefully picked up Eleanor in his arms. Grace did the same with Sophia. Together they carried the girls inside to their rooms, tucking them into bed without even taking off their party dresses. They kissed their foreheads and left in silence. In their own room, finally alone as husband and wife, Alexander pulled Grace into his arms. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For giving me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. For loving my daughters as if they were your own. For teaching me that family is about choice as much as blood. Thank you for fighting for me when it would have been easier to let go. For showing me that I deserve love without conditions. For creating a space where I can be myself without fear." They kissed, soft and long, a promise of all the years to come. They had traveled a difficult road to get there. Pain, mistrust, judgment, fear, but also healing, forgiveness, courage, and a love that refused to be defined or limited by social expectations. It was a family rebuilt on a foundation of truth and conscious choice, and it would be enough, more than enough. It would be everything. End of story. 1 year later, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Michael. The twins, now 11, were devoted big sisters, constantly competing for who could hold the baby the longest. The mansion that was once a place of silent pain now echoed with laughter, a baby's cries, and the sounds of a vibrant, happy family. Alexander expanded his business but always came home for dinner. Grace went back to school, studying psychology at night, inspired by her own journey and a desire to help other traumatized children. The twins flourished in school, confident and resilient, carrying with them lessons about love, loss, and the power of second chances. Audrey served her sentence and moved to another city, cutting ties with the family. Alexander held no grudge, only a sadness for what could have been. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about reconciliation, but about freeing oneself from the weight of hatred. And every night before going to sleep, the twins would look at the photo of their mother that stood in their room and whisper goodnight, ensuring that Isabel would always remain a part of their story, even as new chapters were being written. Because family, they had learned, is not about replacing those we've lost, but about expanding our hearts to include all those we choose to love. And love, true love, never diminishes when shared. It only grows. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Alexander, Grace, Eleanor, and Sophia has touched your hearts in the same way it touched ours in telling it. This journey of second chances, forgiveness, and the transformative power of true love reminds us that family is built not just by blood ties, but by the daily choices to stay, to fight, and to believe. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to explore our special collection of equally captivating narratives about love, overcoming adversity, and redemption. Just click on the playlist to your left to discover more stories that celebrate the complexity of life and the resilience of the human heart. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video, as it helps us continue to bring you moving stories every day. And most importantly, let us know in the comments which part of this story touched you the most. We want to hear your reflections, your own stories of second chances, your thoughts on a love that transcends barriers. Every comment inspires us to create more content that matters. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until the next story.